Okay, let's keep on moving. So last time we spoke, we were working on the plan view and the elevation view. We're going to come back and start working on our section views and detail views. So let's go ahead and bring back our split screen here. There we go. And we will start digging into those. So, all right. I'm going to copy my elevation view over here. Just paste it here for now in a temporary holding location. And what we're going to do is we're going to make construction lines off of that view. Really important that we do this to make sure things line up between views. So I'm going to take those lines and go straight across just like this. Oops, sorry, you got to make sure you snap to the actual endpoints there. So snap to there and there. Okay. And at the base, we got a conglomerate of different lines. So we need to make sure we capture all of those. And then when we get to the end of it, what we're going to do is go and draw a vertical line straight through. This vertical line is going to represent the wall as it sits currently. And then what we're going to do is offset that line over 1 inch. And then offset that line 3/4 of an inch over from there, just like this. Okay, so this is for our panels, the 1 inch gap to represent between the wall and the back of our panel. Only when using panel cleats. If you're using Z-clips, we would have a 1/2 inch gap between the wall and the back of our panel. If we're using panel cleats, also we're showing that 1 inch, and then we're showing a 3/4 inch offset for the panel thickness itself. Okay, now what I'm going to do is highlight all these lines, and I'm going to use that trim command to go ahead and start cleaning these up a little bit. Just like what we did before, in between the reveals, I am cleaning out those extra lines. They are not needed there. They're going to go away. I already did those. Just need these ones. And actually, in fact, these lines are going to stop right there. Because when you get to the bottom of those panels, or the bottom of, sorry, the floor, we have that 1/2 inch thick base trim instead of panels there. So really I can't do a 3/4 inch rectangle there. I need a 1/2 inch rectangle for that. Okay, so let's leave this alone for right now. I'm going to trim these lines back to there, trim this line to there, and that to there. Okay, because then what I'm going to do is kind of just clean up these edges here now. And I'm using the trim command to do that here. So cleaning out all those extra lines that aren't needed. Again, I'm going to come back to this because we need to sort that out. But for right now, we should be left with a 3/4 inch gap at the top between the ceiling and the top of our panel, and then a 1/4 inch gap in between each panel set. And we can guarantee that these panels are going to line up with the panels in the elevation view because we used construction lines from this view to make this view. And vice versa for the plan view to the elevation view. We also use that same exact method, which means that everything is going to be lined up perfectly. It's really, really important that we do that, because otherwise you will end up with, most likely you'll end up with discrepancies within your dimensions on the print, and you want to avoid that as much as possible there. So really important to use your construction lines to your advantage. Make sure that you are using those and lining things up. What I'm doing right here is I drew a line straight down from being in line with the face of the panel and being underneath of that 16th inch gap that we created, and it's going down to the floor. It should be a 10-inch line in total. And what we're going to do with this is we are going to make this a 1/2 inch thick. So offset 0.5. Okay, and then let's go back to that section view we looked at earlier, or this detail for the base trim. Okay, so what we're dealing with here is we have a piece of base trim which is actually made out of solid surface. It's that Cryon mocha colored solid surface we looked at earlier. And what we'll do with something like this is because it needs to be furred out, meaning it needs to have blocking behind it, so that way it can be in line with the front of our panel. What we're going to do is we're going to offset the back of our solid surface 3/4. And you can see what I'm left with is a small gap here. It looks to be about a 1/2 inch. That 1/2 inch, what we'll do is we'll make that with shim. So that'll be shim, and this here will be blocking behind that solid surface. And when we do that, we draw an X for blocking, and we draw a 1 diagonal line for shim. So yeah, that'll be kind of showcasing that solid surface there like we want to show. Now, what's left here is we got to make this weird angle detail. So this angle we know is a 1/4 inch thick based on this note here, and we know that it's 1 inch deep. If you go to look up metal angles online, you're very unlikely to find a metal angle that has a short leg and a long leg like this. What's more likely going to be the case is that you will have a 1 inch leg and a 1 inch leg, and being 1/4 inch thick. If you wanted to confirm if you're able to actually source that metal, good places to look is if you go to, I'm going to go to my on-site links here. So what I have here is a few different websites that you can check out to see if you can find that metal angle. Now, the two that I highly recommend are going to be Central Steel and Wire Company or Metal Supermarkets. Those two are going to give you the majority of the different metal profiles that you can actually purchase. And to make sure that they're at like a stock size, like readily available, not something that's custom made. So I'm going to start with Metal Supermarkets and look for a 1 inch by 1 inch by, said 1/4 inch, right? Yep, 1/4 inch thick angle. So we're going to go in here. We're going to go first to mild steel. We're going to see what we have for angles here. So there's angles right there. Okay, so I'm going to click on angle. And then at the bottom, when you go there, it's going to tell you there's 2 different options out there. One of them is for decorations, wire fencing, furniture. That's probably the one we want. The other one here is for galvanized steel, which is used mostly for, I think, outdoor applications where rust is going to be more more of an issue. So actually, I may have been incorrect. You do see there are ones with shorter and longer legs here, but let's see what we can do. You can filter by size here. You can filter by, well, I don't think we really need to mess with that, but let's go. The size C here is going to be the thickness of that leg. So that we know has to be a 1/4 inch. So let's start there. We're going to look at all angles that are a 1/4 inch in thickness. So you can see the list of what they offer here. And they do offer a 1 inch by 1 inch by 1/4 inch thick steel angle. So we're probably going to roll with that. Let's go back to our CAD file and we're going to draw that in. Okay, so I'm going to use a polyline to draw this, and I'm going to go starting up here, 1 inch down, 1 inch over, 0.25 up, 0.75 back, 0.75 up, and then 0.25 back. So that'll be, just a double check, should be a 1 by 1 by 1/4 inch thick angle, just like that. Okay, so then we're going to place this correctly right here. Let's see, I got to get it right in between these 2 lines here. So I'm going to use mid between 2 points to do that. And it's going to sit here. And let's just verify to see if it needs to stick out proud of the panels. It does by 1/8 of an inch. So one thing that I've already noticed here is that although my angle is 1 by 1, it really is not going to fit here. You can see right now that it's actually cutting into the back of our panel, and we really don't want that. So let's see about how much more of an angle we would need in order to make this fit. So in a perfect world, if we were to get this angle and we were able to make it 1 7/8 long, that would be the most ideal case for us. But let's go and check and see what's available. We need to get something very close to that. And they have 1 3/4, which we can make that work. We go 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 by 1/4 inch. Let's go ahead and try that. So I need to increase this by 0.75. I need to increase this by 0.75. So now when I'm looking at this angle, this is going to be 1 3/4, 1 3/4, 1/4 inch, and 1/4 inch. Okay. Now the only thing that is a discrepancy here now at this point is that we need to make sure that this angle sticks out that 1/8 of an inch, just like what they show on their architectural detail. So we're going to bring this forward, 0.125. And then what we're going to do with that now is, well, let's delete these lines. They're kind of in the way. Didn't mean to delete these. Let's put that back. Put that back. Okay. And then what we really want to do is we want to add some shim back here behind this angle because we need to make sure it's bumped out 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to do that here. Throw a diagonal line in there to represent that that will be shim behind the angle. And then that should do it. So 1 3/4 angle, 1 3/4 angle by 1/4 inch thick. That'll work. Now we need to add the splines like we did in our plan view. And again, if you ever wanted to know what that was, if you forgot, go into your tool palettes and go over to on-site panels. You can go into spline reveal and drag and drop one in. For our purposes today, really what we need to remember is that that spline itself is 1 1/4 by 1/4 inch thick. So 1.25 by 0.25 thick. Then what we're going to do is we are going to flip this using rotate. And we're going to move this so that it fits right dead center there like we did before. So using the move command, it'll ask you for a base point, to which you're going to say shift right click, mid between 2 points, and go from there to there, shift right click, mid between 2 points, go from there to there. Then you're going to trim out any excess lines that you don't need and repeat that process for the other spline reveals on these panels. So again, like before, using this common base point of the corner of the panel. So I can now trim these lines out, and that should do it. Okay, last step for reveals. We need to put in our full depth reveal. And again, typically what you're going to show is a 3/4 thick block by 1.5 inch thick block. You're going to use your move command, place that block at the back of your panel, just like so, and then move that block up to there. So it's touching the ceiling and touching the back of your panel. You still have to add in that shim space. So again, what we'll do is we'll draw in one more rectangle here behind that block, and then add a diagonal line for the shim hatching and throw this on the hatch layer. Okay, now we are getting somewhere. Okay, so before we call that done, let's go ahead and add in the floor, wall, and ceiling hatch behind our panel and the panel cleats. So first off, we're going to on-site annotation here. We're going to hatching, and we're going to floor plus wall plus ceiling hatch. And we're going to drag and drop one of those in, rotate it so it's facing the correct orientation, and then just change the grip points on that block so that way your floor and ceiling all match up and things are looking nice and snug. All right, and the last thing you want here to complete this section view is going to be hatching and panel cleats. So panel cleats, you're going to go into on-site panels, go over to cleats, and you're going to see your wall panel cleat block right there. Drag and drop one of those in. Last time we did talk about panels, what we did was we had used our shop standard as much as possible, which means that these panels we typically will space at 24 inches on center. Now there's going to be times where your panels are going to be too short for that to work. And in this case, I can see right now that this being 24 from there, that is not going to work. So what we're going to need to do is one, we need to make sure we at least have a 3/4 inch gap between the top of this cleat and the block there. So I'm going to lower this down a couple inches. We'll go 2 inches down. And I'll take a copy of those cleats, paste it at the bottom of my panel, and raise that up 2 inches. Now, normally I would say that's good for this because this panel is too short to otherwise include a 24-inch on center spacing. So we're going to leave it like that. Below that, what you want to do is copy these, and we're going to copy these 24, 48, and I think that should probably be enough. We probably won't be able to fit one more. So what we're going to do now, you can see we got 3 sets of cleats for this one panel. We're going to take those cleats and we're going to center them on the back of that panel. So how we're going to do that is use the move command, highlight all 3 cleats, hold down shift right click, mid between 2 points, go from the bottom of the bottom cleat to the top of the top cleat. That will get you a center point, which is dead center between all the cleats. And then you're just going to find the center of your panel and move those there. Okay, and then we're going to repeat that process down below. However, this time we know these panels are equal and equal. So that means that we can just literally copy these cleats from that set of panel to that set of panel, and we're good to go. Okay, last step here, hatching all of our panels and reveals and our metal angle. So let's go through and we'll do that right now. So on-site annotation is where you want to be. You're going to go to your hatching tab, and we're going to use our MDF vertical hatch. We'll hatch these panels in just with that hatch there. Just go ahead and click and drop and click and drop. Oops. Sometimes you'll get a little error like that if you're zoomed in a little too far. So you might have to zoom out a little bit if that happens to you. AutoCAD does function a little bit weird. If you're too zoomed into something, it may not read all the edges of the profile that you're trying to hatch. So it has a little bit of a difficulty understanding that sometimes. So you might have to zoom out just to make up for that. Okay, so I'm using my metal hatch for the angle, my solid surface or stone hatch for the base trim because it is a solid surface material. And then everything else is that MDF hatch, just like this. So section view wise, we are good to go on that. I'm going to move this down to where it wants to go. That'll be down here. And we can delete that extra elevation view now. We do not need that anymore. But we do want to throw in the wall, floor, and ceiling hatch here as well. Actually, we have wall hatch. That's right. That's right. There are wing walls on the sides of this, so we do have a wall hatch there too. Sorry, I had to think about that. So wall, floor, and ceiling hatch, we're going to drag and drop one in. I will rotate this so that way it's facing upward like this guy here. And then we're going to adjust the hatching to form the outside borders of our panel set. All right. I'm going to rotate one of these because I do also want to show the ceiling here. Okay, so just like that, we have our elevation view hatched out to what it needs to be. And we're going to move on to, we should hatch our plan view here too, I guess. And I take back what I said earlier. I'm actually going to remove this for right now because we're going to download the actual CADs for that drinking fountain and paste them into here in just a moment. Now, one thing that I'm already seeing is that I want to connect these two lines together, and I'm having a hard time with that because they are all kind of a mishmash of different polylines. So I kind of exploded that. I'm going to use the fillet command with a radius of 0 to connect the dots with these. Sort of like that. And then later on, when we download the CADs for that water fountain, we'll place that here in the plan view. But for right now, let's go ahead and hatch our panels and our reveals like we did before in our vertical section. I'm just showing that these are all constructed with MDF here. Come on now. This one is fighting me. There it goes. Okay. And then once you've completed this, we're going to go into the, actually, let me throw in some wall hatch too. I just feel like it would be a little bit more beneficial to see that. Throw in the wall hatching here for all this too. Now, because the wall is by others, I'm going to actually put that on the existing layer too. Draw a little bit less attention to it. Probably throw in that wall hatch here as well. And same dealio, existing layer. Like that. Okay. All right. We'll unhide everything if anything's hidden. And then we are going to go into our paper space next and start laying out our views. Views, we have our plan view first. So plan view, again, like we talked about before, if you are ever questioning what the AWI or Architectural Woodwork Institute's standards are for view scales, you can always refer down to your view titles at the bottom of your page. Each view title, depending on what type of view you select, is going to tell you what the minimum scale is for that type of view. So because I'm working with a plan view, I know that here my minimum scale has to be 3/8 equals a foot minimum. And it's always a good idea to increase the size of that view title so that way it lines up with the edge of your text, just like that. Okay. Last step here before we move on is this here is my viewport, that line there. I'm going to shrink this down a tad bit and sort of get a feel for where it's going to go. So what I like to do, and you'll see me do this on every one of these training videos as we're plotting, but I'm going to use the move command. Take that viewport, highlight the viewport, and I'm going to use the move command, grabbing the bottom left corner of my view and snapping it to the left corner of my view title, like so. Then what I like to do is use the move command again. I'm going to move this up 1.5 inches like that and adjust my border for my viewport so that way I'm using my grid lines to kind of fill out this view. I think we should be able to fit the elevation view on this page as well. It might be a little tight because that elevation view is going to be pretty large. I mean, this is, I think we said 17 feet tall roughly. So we're going to give it a shot and see what we can do. It may end up having to go on a separate page, and if that's the case, we won't sweat it too much. But yeah, so on your second view, you're going to want to make sure that you're using the copy command within AutoCAD to make sure that you're copying that viewport. That way you don't break any of the formulas for the view title because they're pretty fragile, and if you copy it with your clipboard using Control-C and Control-V, those formulas will turn into a bunch of hashtags and it will essentially break that formula and it won't be usable anymore without having to reset it up. So again, just be really careful when you're copying viewports. Make sure you're using the COPY copy command within AutoCAD and not the clipboard on your computer. Okay, so moving on to the elevation view. Let's go and scroll down until we see that. Okay, so it is going to be pretty tight, but I think we can make it fit. We're going to go ahead and use the move command again, just like we did before. We're going to use the bottom left corner of that view, snap it to the bottom corner of my view title, and then move that up 1.5 inches like this. adjust your viewport as necessary to make sure that things are kind of lined up nice. This step is not exactly mandatory, but I would highly recommend it because it's going to ensure that if you have to go back into your CAD file at some point in time, or another drafter has to go back in and help make modifications to it, it's going to make things a lot easier for them to be able to find all your views and keep things organized. All right, so what I'm going to do here, because I am short on space, is I'm going to raise this up a little bit. Let's raise it up an inch, which is going to be pretty close to the view, but we'll give it a shot and see what we can do. I might be able to squeeze just enough space in here for us to be able to put in our section calls and our dimensions here on the outsides of this view. That's what I'm kind of hoping for, trying to keep everything sort of like giving myself just enough margin space to make this work. So I'm thinking ahead a couple steps, but it's not a bad thing to be thinking about that ahead of time. When you're setting up your viewports, just try to make sure that you have enough space for everything that you're going to need later on when you go to plot the drawing. All right. So one other thing that I'm going to try to do too is that I'm going to move this view. I know it contradicts what I said earlier because I usually try to line these up with the corner of my view title, but I kind of want to see these panels lined up with these panels here. So for me to be able to do that, what I'm going to do is use the move command, slide these panels over, and then find the edge of my wall using the apparent intersection snap. And then I'm going to drag and drop it like this. Okay, here we go. So now things are lined up. For proof, what you can do is take a line straight down from this view and drop it down to there, and you can see that it's lined up nice and snug with the edge of that panel there. That's just proof that things are lined up perfect here. Now, I wouldn't say that's incorrect, but I think it's going to look cleaner in the end of this when we get to the final plot of the drawing to make sure things are lined up. Usually I like to make sure things are attached to the edge of that view title, but in this case, it's going to be a little bit easier to read the print if everything is lined up nicely on the page at the end. So what I'm doing right now is locking these viewports. You just double click on that, click on the padlock, and it's going to give you that locked viewport there. Okay, so then the last thing we need to do is bring in our section view. So we're going to do that here, again, using the COPY copy command for this. We'll bring this in, paste it off to the side, and then let's go locate that section view. Got to unlock that viewport first, and then go find that section. So there it is right there. Section views, you always want to be at least 1.5 inches equals a foot minimum per AWI scales. If you want to check that, you can look here, change that to section, and bada bing, bada boom, there you go. And one other thing I'm noticing here is that the top of my view is being cut off, so I need to adjust a little bit. Okay, so here you can see I'm running into a small issue where my panels are going to be over the top of the view. Most likely it will just fit, just barely. We can make this work. Okay. Because these panels are so tall, I'm still going to line it up with the bottom left corner of this viewport. But as you can see, I need to lower this down just to make this fit within the border of my page. I can't have it sticking out past, so that's just a no-no. I don't want that. I am gonna try, see, I just kind of moved it a little bit up and down just to get a feel for where I can put this. So I got it kind of like equally spaced in between the top and the bottom here. That'll work. Okay. I think we can make that work. Okay. And then from there, we're going to switch these view titles around to read the correct views and then fill out the correct page information for these types of views. So view 1 is our plan view. That's cool. View 2, because we're going left to right and top to bottom like reading a book. View number 2 is your elevation view. View number 3 is your section view. And you do want to make sure you're going in the correct order too. So plan, elevation, section, details. Well, details can really go anywhere, but just to kind of maintain that same method of thinking. All right, so let's make sure that all our viewports are locked as well. Yep, we are all locked here. And then the last step here before we go and throw dimensions, material calls, elevation sections, and detail calls is we want to make sure that we're filling out those arc refs to be the correct arc reference as to what you're referring to see this view. So we have all those pulled up from previous video here. We're going to go into those and find what view you want. I will always, always, always suggest that if you have two views for one thing, like our plan view has an overall floor plan view plus an enlarged view, I would always call out the enlarged view over the overall view. The reason is the enlarged view is going to provide you with more detail. It's going to be the most accurate to field conditions and everything else too. So what we're going to do is go to for the view number slash, and then you want your page number, which we can go find that here. That is A-621. Okay. Then elevation view. Following suit, let's go through our drawings again. We got view number 6. On page A622. Whoops, I need the hyphen in there too to be accurate. There we go. Perfect. And then the section view. Really, this is kind of there really isn't one, but there kind of is, because remember when we looked at that earlier, we were provided a section through the base, but not a section through the panel. So what I'm going to do is write SIM for similar, and then put that reference there. So view 4 on A730. Okie dokie. So everything should be filled out. You can quickly double check and make sure you didn't miss anything. Your numbers all match up to what they need to be. And then the next step in the plotting process is going to always be, well, you can go about this other ways if you'd like to, but I always teach this method first. So we're going to go dimensions. We're going to go dimensions, then view calls, like elevation, section, detail calls, and then material calls and hardware calls at the very end. So I like to teach it that way because if you go and dimension everything and it matches up to what's in the arcs, then you're golden there. Then you just have to match up your view calls to your view numbers and page numbers in your drawing. And then the reason I do the materials and hardwares last is because then it's fresh on your mind when you go to fill out your page notes at the very end of the print. So I save that for last, typically. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and throw some dimensions in this guy. So we're going to double click on that viewport, making sure that we are drawing inside of that viewport. We don't want to be putting dimensions on our paper space because if we do that and something changes, it's going to get all goofy and messed up. So what you want to do is be dimensioning within the model space. And you can do that by double clicking in your viewport. It will take you through there into that model space. Okay, so we're going to go dimlin, and we're going to start dimensioning these strings of dimensions across. What I would like to do is I need to make sure that all these dimensions are spaced accordingly, the same height off of my view. I like to kind of do that to make things look nice and even, so that way when I'm done with my drawing, everything matches up and it looks real pretty. Like there's no like sort of inconsistency within the offsets of my dimensions there, meaning they're all like the same height off of my view. when I get to dimensions like these 1/4-inch ones and these 3/4-inch ones, you can see that they do overlap my views. So that's going to be somewhat of an issue. To accommodate that, what you want to do is highlight those dimensions and then go into properties, and you're going to go find what's called the fill color here. So highlight those dimensions, go over here where it says none and fill color, and you're going to say background. Okay, once you've done that, you can see it makes a whited out box around your dimension, so that way your dimension doesn't overlap your view. Now you can always avoid that too by pulling your dimension left or right, or raising it up or lowering it to make sure it doesn't overlap too. But that's just an easy way to go about ensuring that you're not going to have any sort of congested like overlaps in your dimensions and your line work in your print. You want to avoid that as much as you possibly can. So to accurately dimension these, what we're going to do is highlight each of these dimensions for the reveals. Then we're going to go into properties and we're going to go to text override. Now we are not going to override the dimension, and to not override the dimension, all you do is a less than, greater than. And then you're going to write right after that dimension, we want to put reveal. Because these are reveals between panels, I want to make sure that we're calling them out as such. So, all right. Now that I've got that, I kind of just move that over to make it not overlap as much. But yeah, so now that we got that, we got all of our reveals dimensioned. There is a hold dimension on this 5 feet, so we may want to add that in as well to make sure that does not change. And then what we can do here as well at these dimensions, because they're equal with each other, if you wanted to showcase that they're equal, you highlight those dimensions like we did for the reveal, go into properties, text override, less than, greater than, and then EQ. That'll represent that these are equally spaced panels. And also, it's a good idea to still show the overall dimension for that too, because that way, when somebody's trying to add up the math later, they can actually see, see what that dimension really should be. Okay. Then the last step you need here, like we mentioned before, is we still need a VIF dimension between wall to wall. That is going to be critical here to make sure that these panels get made properly and there's no, the panels are not made overly wide or overly narrow. So what we need to do is pull a dimension from this corner to this corner. And you can either show that here or up here. I'll let that be up to you. I really do like seeing my dimensions all on the same side of my view if possible. Now that's not always going to be the case, so that's why I said I'm going to leave it up to you. But you always want to make sure that you don't put a dimension somewhere that's going to be hard to read. Like if I put this dimension here, it's going to be in the middle of these restrooms and kind of overlapping the wall. So I don't really want that. But what I'm going to do with this is before the dimension, I'm going to write VIF and leave that dimension as it is. This is the dimension from wall to wall, which is the parameter of what we're working within. So we need to make sure that that is measuring out as a VIF. Anytime you're working with other people's scope like that. Okay, so next up, let's go to our elevation view and we're going to dimension that. Dimension, let's go from there to there. So we got 10 inches there. Just like before, I'm going to draw a line a couple inches out. I think I did 4 inches there. See how that looks. I might come out a little bit further than that, maybe another 2 inches there. So a total of 6. Dim, continue. And I want to go from top of base to underside of that panel there. We'll get into the little itty bitty dimensions here when we get to our detail views later on, so don't worry about that just yet. Here we're going to go from panel to panel and also measuring the reveals in between. And just like our plan view, we are going to label these reveals as reveals. So we're going to go over to properties, text override, and write reveal after that dimension. Now, these are sticking out a little bit too far, I feel like. So what we're going to do is you can either use the stretch command to do all of them at once, or you can manually move them individually, but it just takes more time. So I'm going to use the stretch command to move these over about 6 inches in, something like that. So they're a lot closer to my view now. What I want to do next is go and measure the overall height from floor to ceiling. So I'm going to go from the bottom of there to the top of there. And same as before, take a line 6 inches off of the view, so that way we're matching consistent offsets with our dimensions. We're going to go 174 AFF, and it's actually not a bad idea to put a VIF on that too. So verify infield 174 inches above finished floor. Not a bad idea to have that ceiling verified to make sure it's truly 174, even though that's what the architecturals show. It's not a bad idea to include that as well. Okay, now we're going to get into dimensioning panel width. Now, one thing you could probably do is I probably don't need to show the panel widths here and on the plan view. So what I might do is I might take back some of the dimensions I've already placed on the plan view in lieu of placing them here, or kind of like replacing what's there with what's here. And right now I'm using a dim continue to dimension those revealed, kind of like that. And just like that, we got our dimensions there. I'll highlight these just like before. We will highlight those, go to the, oh, whoops, got an extra line highlighted. Go into properties, text override, replace that to say reveal. Okay. Now this, again, this is a hold dimension according to the architecturals here, so we need to make sure that that is maintained. And then these are our equal dimensions here. So highlight those, properties, text override, less than greater than EQ. Okay. Last thing I want to do is also bring these up a tiny bit so they're all closer to my view and not so far away. So kind of like maybe 3-4 inches up like that would be better. Okay, now kind of going back to what I was just referring to, because I have these dimensions on my elevation view, I really don't need to show them here. And I'm going to remove them from here and actually just use this view to show the overall width from wall to wall. Figured it might be a little easier to do it this way because then I'm putting less clutter on this view, but also still showing the same amount of information, just spreading it out across the different views that I have here. Okay, let's go to the section view. Oh no, I'm sorry, one more thing before we call that. Let's make sure that we are, we either want to bring these dimensions down like this, and that way they're not overlapping the view, because it can make it look like there's a bunch of joints in the base trim. Now, if that, that's one way to handle that. Probably the best way to handle it actually is just to bring these straight down to the floor like this. We're going to follow that method of approach all the way through. Bring these down to here. Whoops. There we go. Okay, that looks a lot better because now you don't have all these lines overlapping your base trim anymore. Let's go to our section view now like we were about to do, and let's dimension these out. Again, kind of like before, I'm going to reserve my little dimensions most likely for a detail view. And so what I would like to do here is dimension from top of base to bottom of panel. and kind of follow through these dimensions here. So throughout the print, we're just going to dimension all of our panels, our reveals. We're going to come back and do our text override again to show that these are reveals. So go back to properties, text override, less than greater than reveal. Okay, move that in 3 inches. I'm going to move this down a couple inches like that so it's not overlapping anymore. And probably should move this in 3 inches too, like we did up there, because that's sticking out a little far as well. Okay. So right now, what we've got is a pretty good set of dimensions for everything that we have here. We're showing our reveal widths, our panel widths, panel heights. We're showing our base trim height and ceiling height. Overall width of wall to wall. So we are good. We have everything that we need. We're going to move into the detail views next. So whenever you're dealing with panels, it's a really good idea to show a unique or a detail view for every unique instance. So like, for example, if I have spline reveals, I can show one detail to encompass all the spline reveals on that print. That's fine. I don't need to show a detail for every single spline reveal, just one and done. I also want to show a detail for a full depth reveal in this case as well. And I kind of want to show a detail of what's happening here because this is very hard to see without making this larger scale. So let's go ahead and start working our way through those. So detail views, as we talked about before, you're going to use a circle. You're going to use a shift right click mid between 2 points. And you're going to go snap to there and to there. Now, just like this, what you're going to do is draw that circle in. I set mine to a specific radius of a 0.25, meaning that I can copy that radius from one view to the next. I'm also going to set that circle to the dimension layer and set it to a line type of hidden 2. That way I get these dashed lines in here. Now let's copy this down. We want to locate all the different reveal details we want to show. So I'm going to put one there, and then I'm going to put one down here as well to be able to show that detail of that kind of oddball angle detail at the base. So I need to show that as well. Once I've dropped these circles in, and also keep in mind I'm dropping these in the paper space and not the model space, I'm going to use the copy command, copy the viewport, the view title, and each of these circles that we need for our details. Now I'm going to paste this up here, and I'm going to use that copy command again and make 2 more copies because I need 3 details in total. Next up, we're going to use the VP clip command to condense these down to those bubbles. Just like this. And delete any of the bubbles that do not have information within them. Okay. Then we need to increase the scale. I'm going to make these all 1 inch equals, or sorry, 1 foot equals a foot, so essentially full scale. And I'm going to slightly raise them up so that way they're right above that view title. But as you can see what I'm doing, I'm still lining it up with the edge of my view title there. Raising it up a little bit. And then same deal all the way around. Okay, and then we're going to label these. Now details, they're always going to have a letter instead of a number. So first, let's change these all to say detail instead of section. And then we're going to go letters versus numbers. So instead of 3, we'll go A. Instead of 3, we'll go B. And instead of 3, we'll go C. Then what we're going to do is stack these views so that they're, we'll put them in here and we'll get them nice and placed within what we have right here. So I'm going to see about what I can do. You got detail A right there. Detail B, I'm stacking it right on top right now, but in order to move it again, what I'm going to do is use another move command and then type in PR, which will allow me to select the previously selected object. Do the same thing here. Move PR. Okay, so now we've got all three details right here. You can also see that the way I created these, that these details all line up with one another. So if I draw a line from the back of my panel straight down, all of these are in line, so it kind of looks nice and like very artsy, like everything's like straight up and down. Nothing's kind of like zigzag, staggered, whatever you call it. It's all good to go. Now the architect didn't specifically give us any arc references for these details, so we're going to write NA for all of these except for the base trim one. The base trim one, again, is going to stay sim at 4/A730 because that is the view that shows that base trim right there. Okay, so let's save. See how we're doing on time. We are about 9 minutes till the hour, so we'll go ahead and add our final touches in here and see if we can knock this guy out. All right, so before we move on to view calls, section details and elevation calls, we need to move on to, we need to dimension these first. So let's go ahead and add these dimensions for these views, and then we will move on to the next step in the process here. Okay. Again, if you ever have something that's overlapping, it's a good idea to change the fill color to background. It's going to allow you to make sure that you don't have overlapping lines like this. That would be ideal. All right, so dim Lin. You can see what I'm doing here is I'm dimensioning the gap between the panels as well as the panel thickness. Now, it's not really necessary to dimension the panel thickness, but I do want to show that gap to allow the architect to visualize that we need that 1 inch of space for shimming and for our panel cleats. Without it, it's kind of a guessing game. There's really no way to dimension that. So I kind of do that within my detail views like this here. Trying to copy these over if I can, so I can salvage some of those. All right. So last step here is these little itty bitty dimensions that we've got. We need to make sure that we are showing these because this is the only view that's really going to allow us to show those 16th inch gap dimensions. So there we go. And there's really not a better way to show these. So this is going to be where they live. Again, I have overlap here, so I'm going to go back into my properties and change my fill color to background here. Okay, so really that's about it for dimensions that we need here, showing the gap, the panel, any reveal thickness or reveal widths there. And then these minor gaps that we're showing here around that metal angle. All right, so last steps. We again need to add our view titles and then our finishes and hardware. So view titles, let's go ahead and do those. First one, always start back at the top on your plan view. We'll drag in the elevation view, which is going to tell the reader of the print where to go from here to be able to see the front view of our panels. What I'm doing here is I'm kind of lining things up a little bit. And if you want to verify your elevation view, here is view 2 on P15.0. So we're going to change that out to read 2. And then we're going to come down here and we have one section view to add, which is going to be this guy here. All right, so section view 3, and you can re-verify that here if you'd like to. And we're going to place that on our panels up here. Make sure that your view does not, or your viewport does not clip your section call too. Really, really important. But also make sure that you don't overlap like this. You want to make sure that your tail of your section call is outside of your dimensions and your view. So not like that. You want to be more like this here. Avoid as much overlap as possible. Because the plan view is kind of like a horizontal section, what I can do then as well is I can copy this view title, or sorry, this view call, change out the number to read view 1, and then I can rotate it to show that I'm looking down at those panels. And what I'm going to do is use the rotational grip here. Really important that you make sure you do that. You do not want to use the rotate command for this because it will mess up your text. Okay, and here I'm just going to make that like 215 roughly, so that way we're seeing what we need to see there. Last but not least, we need to call out our details. So in your paper space here, since these circles are in the paper space, we have to put the detail calls out here instead of in the model space. We'll go detail A, P15.0, draw an arc, and we're going to connect that arc to the center of that circle to the center of that circle. What we'll then do is trim that arc so that way it's only touching the outside of each bubble. And then you're going to use match properties to match that property of that circle to this arc. So it's a red dimensional or dimension layer dashed line like that. Okie dokie. Now we're going to copy that down, change out the number, or sorry, the letter for that view. That way we're showing the correct information and telling the reader where to go to find the information for their drawing. Here I got a little overlap, so what I'm going to do is kind of raise this up a little bit just to make room for this view call here. And just re-verify to make sure that everything matches up. So C is the angle, C is the angle, B is the spline, B is the spline, A is the full depth, A is the full depth. So as long as everything lines up and it looks good, then we are good to move forward. I will probably break this here. It's getting close to an hour. And then the last video of this will be real short. All we're going to be doing is adding in the water fountain and the hardware and finish calls. So that'll be the last video for this one here in just a moment.